In today's video, I want to share a story that I never thought I'd tell. Not because it's scandalous, but because it changed me in ways I still can't fully explain. It started the day a young man walked into my home with nothing more than a backpack, a shy smile, and a camera swinging from his neck. I had no idea that day he would walk straight into my heart. For most of my life, I was the kind of woman who didn't believe in slowing down. While my friends were falling in love, building families, and living through all the messy, beautiful chaos of relationships, I was chasing something else. Boardrooms replaced dinner dates. Deadlines took the place of holidays. Airports became my second home. And somewhere between magazine covers and corporate victories, I built a life that was loud on the outside but painfully quiet when the noise stopped. My name is Samantha. I'm 50 years old, single, and for the longest time, I believed that was by choice. But the truth is, maybe I just never gave love the time or space to exist. That's when Ethan arrived. He was 22, the son of my best friend, Janet, a woman I'd known since college. She'd called me from Paris a few weeks earlier. Her voice filled with that easy charm only Janet had. "Sam, darling," she said. "Ethan got a photography internship in New York, but finding a decent place has been a nightmare. Could he stay with you for a bit? You won't even notice he's there." I remember laughing. "Janet, I live alone in a 3-bedroom apartment. I'll survive a house guest." She laughed back. "He's a good boy. Polite. You'll like him." That day, when I opened my door to him, I realized good boy didn't begin to describe him. He had that spark, the kind of quiet curiosity you can't fake. His eyes held warmth, but also the restlessness of someone still discovering who they are. That first evening, he called me Miss Samantha. I laughed, shaking my head. "Just Samantha will do." He smiled a little embarrassed and said my name again, Samantha. It rolled off his tongue like he'd practiced it before saying it out loud. There was something about the way he looked at me. Not with admiration or politeness, but attention. Like he was actually seeing me, not just the woman he was staying with. And for the first time in years, I felt visible again. Not as a boss or a brand, but as a person. We had dinner together at my kitchen island that night. He asked about my travels, my company, my stories. Not with small talk, but genuine curiosity. And when I turned the conversation toward him, toward his photography, his whole face lit up. "I like capturing people when they stop pretending to be perfect," he said. "That's when they're the most real." That line, it stayed with me. Because I'd spent so much of my life trying to be perfect that I'd forgotten what real even looked like. Have you ever met someone who looked at you like you were still someone worth noticing? Even when you'd stopped noticing yourself? If this story already has your heart leaning in, hit that like button, because what came next was something I never expected to happen. At first, I kept reminding myself, he's just Janet's son. A guest. A polite, kind young man. But by the second week, something shifted. Not suddenly, not like lightning, but quietly, like the first hint of spring after a long winter. It started with small, unspoken gestures. He'd refill my wine before I asked. He'd linger after dinner, talking about life, music, art. One night, we both stayed up late. I was reading by the balcony window, and he was editing photos on his laptop. Out of nowhere, he looked up and said softly, "You have this light about you when you're not trying." I laughed, brushing my hair behind my ear. That nervous, self-conscious laugh women use when they don't know what else to do. But I felt it, a flutter in my chest that had been asleep for years. That feeling between fear and thrill. The one that reminds you you're still alive. The next day, Ethan asked something that completely disarmed me. "Would you let me photograph you?" At first, I thought he was joking. "I haven't posed for anything in decades," I said. "Not since my 30s. And trust me, that woman in those old photos, she doesn't exist anymore." But he looked straight at me and said, "That's exactly why I want to. Because you're real. You're not pretending. That's beautiful." That word, beautiful. It's strange how, as women, we slowly stop believing it belongs to us after a certain age. And yet, the way he said it, it didn't sound like flattery. It sounded like truth. So I said yes. We set up in my living room, nothing fancy, just natural light, no makeup, no staging. At first, I felt awkward. Every pose felt forced. Every line on my face screamed louder than I wanted it to. But Ethan had this way of making silence feel safe. He didn't rush me. Didn't direct. Just waited for me to be. At one point he stepped closer, adjusting the angle of my chin with his fingers. It was a brief, respectful touch, but something in the air changed. Neither of us moved. It wasn't attraction, not yet. It was recognition. A moment that said, I see you. When he finally clicked the shutter, it felt like he had captured more than my image. He had captured the part of me I'd buried long ago. After he left the room, I sat there for a while, hands trembling. I told myself it was just the camera, just an innocent project. But deep down, I knew something was opening inside me, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. By the third session, he asked if we could shoot in softer lighting. The golden hour, he said. That time when the light forgives everything. He suggested my bedroom because of the window light. Something about that idea felt intimate, vulnerable, but I trusted him. All right, I said. Just soft light. Nothing staged. We opened the curtains slightly, letting the dusk filter in. The air was warm, quiet, heavy with something unspoken. I sat at the edge of the bed in a silk blouse and jeans. He lifted his camera and began to shoot, slow, deliberate clicks that somehow felt like heartbeats. Then he hesitated. Can I ask you something? He said softly. I nodded. I want to photograph the version of you that you hide. The one that feels she's not allowed to be seen. Those words hit me like a confession I hadn't known I was waiting to hear. No man had ever said something like that to me. Not with desire, but with understanding, with reverence. I felt something inside me let go. Not out of seduction, but surrender. I wanted to be seen, not as a brand, not as a boss, not as a woman fighting time, but as myself. So I stood up. Slowly. And for the first time in years, I stopped hiding. Ethan didn't rush. He didn't look away. He just captured me. Quietly, respectfully, like every frame was a moment of truth. When he finally lowered his camera, we both stood there, silent. And in that silence, something changed between us forever. If your heart's racing right now, hit that like button. Because what happened next wasn't planned. And yet, it felt inevitable. When the last flash of dusk slipped away, the room settled into a soft, amber half-dark. The only sound was the faint hum of the city outside, and the steady rhythm of our breathing. Ethan lowered his camera, but his eyes stayed on me, not staring, not analyzing, just seeing. And in that stillness, I realized I hadn't felt that scene in years. He stepped forward a little, careful, almost asking permission with each inch. His hand brushed against my arm, light, respectful, tentative. Is this okay? He whispered. I nodded. He exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding that breath for hours. Then his thumb traced a line just below my ribs, an innocent gesture that felt anything but small. When he leaned in and kissed me, it wasn't the kind of kiss that demands. It was a question, and I answered before I even knew I had. It was quiet, gentle, the kind of moment that doesn't need witnesses because it already knows it's real. And when it ended, the air between us changed forever. The next morning, sunlight spilled through my curtains like nothing had happened. But my heart knew better. I could still feel his lips, still hear that faint click of the shutter, still see the version of myself he'd captured, the woman who had finally stopped pretending she didn't need to be touched. I stood in front of the mirror, brushing my hair, pretending to be the same Samantha I'd always been. But nothing about me was the same. I was 50 years old, successful, composed, and utterly lost. Ethan was in the kitchen when I walked out. He offered me a mug. Coffee. Our fingers brushed when I took it, and that simple contact sent a rush through me I couldn't hide. I pulled back too quickly, spilling a little coffee onto the counter. Sorry, I said. He smiled softly. It's fine. But it wasn't fine. Inside I was fighting a story. I could hear my conscience whispering, he's 22. He's Janet's son. You know better. And yet another voice whispered louder, but he makes you feel alive. So I avoided him. I told him I had meetings, deadlines, errands, anything to keep space between us. But that evening, when I stepped onto the balcony for air, he was already there. Camera on the table, sleeves rolled up, the golden city stretching out beneath him. He looked up. Hey. I nodded. leaning on the railing beside him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "I didn't mean to make things weird," he said finally. I like being around you. After last night, I thought maybe you felt the same." I turned to face him, my throat tight. "Ethan," I started. "This shouldn't have happened. You're Janet's son. You deserve someone your age, someone who hasn't spent half her life hiding behind work." He smiled, not boyishly, but with a quiet strength that surprised me. "You're not baggage," he said. "You're a whole story. And I want to read every chapter." Those words broke something open in me. Because how do you explain to a young man that you've spent years convincing yourself you're too late for love? That you've built walls so high you forgot there were doors? But he didn't ask me to explain. He just reached out and took my hand. No pressure, no expectation, just presence. And in that moment, I stopped running from what I felt. That night, I couldn't sleep. The city glowed outside my window, 1,000 stories flickering in the dark. I stood there, hair loose, robe hanging open, feeling exposed, not in body but in truth. Then came a knock. Soft. Hesitant. I didn't need to ask who it was. When I opened the door, Ethan stood there, uncertain but steady. He held a blanket in one hand and 2 mugs in the other. "I made tea," he said. "Couldn't sleep." Neither could I. He stepped inside, and the world went silent again. We sat by the window, sharing the tea, watching the lights dance on the glass. No words. Just breathing, closeness, understanding. When he set his mug down, he looked at me with that same quiet focus. The look that said he saw something worth seeing. And before I knew it, I was kissing him again. No hesitation this time. No guilt in the moment, just truth. The days that followed blurred together. Laughter in the kitchen, late-night talks that stretched into dawn. Photos that captured more than images. But beneath every tender second, there lived the unspoken question. What happens now? Because life doesn't pause for love stories that defy reason. It keeps moving. And sooner or later, reality catches up. One morning, Janet called. She was cheerful, oblivious, asking how Ethan was settling in. And for the first time in years, I felt my voice falter. I told her he was doing great, talented, hardworking, polite. Every word was true, but every word hurt. After that call, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the empty mug he'd left behind. I knew we couldn't keep pretending we were just 2 people in the same house. We were something else, something fragile and beautiful, and completely impossible. That night, Ethan found me again on the balcony. He didn't say a word at first. Just stood beside me, letting the city noise fill the silence. Then softly he said, "You're pulling away." "I have to," I whispered. He turned to me, eyes searching. "Because of her? Because of everything I said? Because I'm afraid?" He reached for my hand again. "Then let me hold the fear with you." It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a demand. It was love, simple, unguarded, unashamed. If you've ever been torn between what feels right and what the world tells you is wrong, you know what this feels like. Hit that like button if you've ever faced that kind of moment. The story doesn't end here, it never really does. Because love like that doesn't vanish when it's over. It lingers in the small things. In the scent of coffee. In the light of early morning. In the echo of a voice that once made you feel seen. Ethan eventually finished his internship. When he left, he hugged me longer than he should have. No promise, no plans, just a quiet understanding that what we'd shared was real. And that it would live somewhere between memory and possibility. And as the door closed behind him, I realized something. He hadn't just walked into my heart. He'd reminded me I had one. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. You're never too old to be seen. You're never too successful to feel. And sometimes, the most unexpected person will remind you that you're still capable of love. Because love doesn't ask your age, your title, or your timing. It simply asks if you're brave enough to let it in. If this story moved you, subscribe, because next week I'm sharing what happened when Janet came back from Paris, and the truth could no longer stay hidden.